Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hi everyone, my name is Eryn and I'm your host for today, joined by Matt from NDIS Property Australia here in Brisbane, and you're listening to the SDA Housing Podcast, a show that explains, highlights, guides and brings awareness about all things SDA in this ever-changing NDIS world. Today's exciting topic is investing, and we're joined by David, who is one of our investors, and he's just going to tell us a little bit about investing and everything. So do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, David, and where you're living at the moment? Just a bit of background?
Yeah, by all means. Thank you for having me. I'm in Sydney. I'm what you might call a mum or dad investor. And so retirement is probably, in the horizon. And so therefore planning for that is I guess, my focus at the moment. Yeah,
awesome. What do you do for a living, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, by all means. My background is accounting, and so I know the numbers. Whereas I'm not working now, so I'm sort of semi-retired, I guess you would say.
Awesome. Matt, do you want to ask?
Awesome. Yeah. So you recently invested in SDA property. Can you just describe to the listeners the property that you recently bought? Just a little bit about it in your own words.
Yeah, by all means. So when looking at the different options that are around, they are very popular. And so therefore I ended up focusing on the Western Australia side of things, because currently in the property market, it's an area that's moving. And then in particular, when you look at beachside suburbs, they seem to be always quite popular as well. And so that's why I ended up at the North Coogee development. And so investing in one of the apartments there.
Yeah, because I think when I originally spoke to you, I was speaking about how it's a great location, both in terms of for an investor, in terms of looking at the potential capital gains with it being on the water. And then as well as that, obviously the lifestyle basis for a potential participant moving in would be great as well. Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's right. It's an ideal location. And so even if it wasn't an NDIS property, ideal location. And I guess to that aspect, many people move in or rent a place based on emotion. And if you like the location and the appeal of the site or the building, then people are more likely to gravitate towards it. And so, yeah, North Coogee is the place to be.
Excellent.
Yeah, I really like the North Coogee apartments. When we first saw them, Matt and I, we were talking about them for ages, because they're just, they're fantastic and they're really nice. And we were like, maybe we give it like 2 weeks that they'll stay up and then they'll all be gone.
Yeah, exactly.
I can imagine them being very popular, and so I'm not sure if any are left at all. But
I think at this stage we've got one or two left.
I think there's like the penthouse and then
the penthouse and then one more apartment. So we expect probably at some point this week or early next week for that last one to sell. So if you are curious about this opportunity at all, feel free to reach out to us. Eryn will put the how to get in contact with us in the description. David, in terms of yourself, are you a previous property investor at all? Have you invested in properties in the past?
Yes, indeed. So I've, for a number of years, have thought about the future and what's the best way in order to retire on a passive income. And so property for me was the go-to area. And so, yes, I've invested in most states around Australia. And so this is, I think, another foray into WA.
Excellent. Awesome.
Do you just want to tell us a little bit about when you decided to invest in NDIS property? Like, why did you consider it? What made you choose NDIS properties?
Yeah, by all means. And so when looking at property, there are lots of options out there. And by going through online research, an advert came up in respect to NDIS property because I hadn't previously heard about it before. And so that triggered my thoughts initially. But needless to say, as an investor, it's good to be cautious. Do a lot of reading and research and study first. And so that's what I did. And so I started learning more about what is NDIS and SDA housing. And that brought me to your website, which then had lots of information through these same podcasts, people sharing about different concepts and ideas and thoughts in respect to the whole NDIS. And so for me, in order to prepare for the future through an investment, you need to then select the right property or the right fit for the individual, because one fit may not be good for another. And I guess if I thought that I could not just invest money in any property, but one that gives back a benefit to the business or to the economy as well, or to participants in particular in this case, and also make a good yield out of it, then, hey, that seems like the way to go. And so, after more digging and questions and lots of emails and things, I ended up going down the investment path in the NDIS space.
Yeah, awesome. So what was kind of going through your mind a little bit leading up to the purchase? So let's say a week before you actually decided to purchase.
I guess for me, a lot happened in a week. And so hence, from learning about the concept of NDIS, I did a lot of reading. And so almost by the end of the week, so some people might take a lot longer and to make a decision, and that's perfectly fine. And so for me, it was, within a week or 10 days, I soon realized that this was a good idea. And because of the current popularity around this space, it's better to jump in on an opportunity while it's still there. Otherwise, you may miss out. And so it's, I guess, a very exciting time as well, albeit a short time. So leading up to that sort of investment, it's sort of information overload as I learn a lot of information about the space, and then excitement when you decide to go for it.
Excellent. So that actually kind of ties into my next question in terms of, obviously we're talking about the podcast. We're on a podcast, and you've been an avid listener. You've gone through most of the episodes, or all of the episodes you've said to us. Is there, I suppose, other resources that you used in that kind of process of learning more about NDIS, or resources that you'd recommend for someone who's probably might be new to this and is just thinking about dipping their toes in the water?
Yeah, by all means. And I guess Google can give you so much. But I've also noticed that on Facebook, if you subscribe to an investor Facebook page, then often the feeds that come through as a result of the Facebook algorithm have more investor information in it. And so you open your scope of knowledge to more sites. And so by doing that, I've discovered a lot more about ways to invest within NDIS. So purchasing outright is just one method. There are others, whether it be through purchasing through a self-managed fund. I've also come across others whereby a builder or a developer is looking to fund their NDIS development. And so they will give an investor a return if you give them, if you lend, let's call it 100,000 for 3 years. So during that build process, the builder uses your cash to build the NDIS property, and they, as an investor, they give you a return for that. And then I've also come across other areas whereby there is like a syndicate investment opportunity. So the cost of an individual NDIS house is quite high. And so for those who can't afford the 800, 900, 1 million range, you can invest a portion of that. And so it could be just 50,000 or 100,000. And then the syndicate with the developer will build the property and manage it for you. And so you just get a portional return on your investment within that space as well. So when investigating and learning, I've discovered that there are lots of ways for a variety of people, depending on your level of finances, in order to be able to get into the NDIS space, if that's where you want to be.
Yeah, awesome. So I suppose on the other side of things, what were your kind of concerns leading up to this, or your challenges that you faced, either through your own research or through your own situation, or in terms of the entire process?
Yeah, I think that initially a lot of research and advice that you're getting from people is third party or external. So the first thing as an investor you need to do is learn to trust, but to learn to trust the right people. I guess that's key. And so an initial internal obstacle, I guess, relates to that trust factor. And if you build up trust in people or an organization, then you can rely on what advice they are giving you. And so that's key. I think the other area in particular comes down to the funding or the finance side of things. And so with a lot of listening to the podcasts and other research, whether it be financing through a super fund or individually, and how the banks don't view the inner value of an NDIS property, whether that be in the capital side or the rental return. And so the financial element to NDIS is probably one of the areas for listeners to investigate into further, because it just means that the initial deposit that you may need is higher than the usual, 10 or 20% for a regular property.
Yep. Mm. So in terms of this investment, we've kind of already touched on the what you're trying to achieve with it in terms of the higher yields. Is there anything else you're trying to achieve with this, or what was your thinking when you decided to pull the trigger, I suppose?
Yes, and I think initially there are a number of advertisements from investors advertising very high returns, and I think they are probably inflated in order to encourage people to invest. And so it's worth being very cautious about that space as well. But for me, it's about looking for what a reasonable return might be, not necessarily a high return, but a reasonable return. And in my situation, it relates to retirement, as well as a social benefit. And so hence, if I can invest through a super fund by the time that I retire, then it will be at a level that should be able to support me through retirement. And in the process of that, providing a social benefit. And so in my situation, it's a win-win.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. And are you considering any additional NDIS properties in the future at all, or is that something you've kind of opened up to, or are you just sticking with your one that you've got for now?
Yeah, good question. And so I have become very excited, I guess, about this space. And so even within a few days, I definitely contemplated getting more than one apartment over in North Coogee.
Well, there's one left, David. There's one left.
By the sound of that. So I'm still open to talk about that. I guess my thought process also is to not go too fast too early. So to make sure that your financial, each listener's financial situation is at a level where it can easily accommodate interest rate fluctuations, vacancy periods that may occur in any sort of rental. And so, yes, indeed, I will be looking at further NDIS properties, and maybe I'll try and stagger it a year apart. But it's definitely a space that I want to, invest in again further. And even if it comes to land and build opportunities, I think that's a good option as well.
Excellent. Awesome. So I suppose on that note, moving forward, and I suppose the process leading up to the first investment, were there any other companies that you spoke to? Maybe you don't need to name names, but that do something similar to what we do, at all?
I must say I was speaking to a couple of wealth advisors or financial planning type companies during that period, and I threw a couple of names in front of them to test them out, as it were, to see about different styles of accommodation. And so I mentioned student accommodation was one, to see their thoughts, and NDIS was another. And I was surprised to hear that they knew very little about the NDIS space, if anything at all. And so during the conversation received, I guess, no feedback around this element, this side of things. And so there is, probably a gap of knowledge, I guess, in that space. I think that there are a few other companies that I talked to as well that related to services around the space. So whether it be super funding or investment or loans, etc. But I found it very hard to find other people in the space exactly where you are, willing to educate and help people out in terms of understanding of the NDIS space, but then also provide an opportunity for them to actually invest in bricks and mortar. Other organizations that I spoke to seemed to be more on the developer side, and so they were chasing dollars themselves, as opposed to, helping out mum and dad investors with the opportunities that you've put together.
Yeah, because we find when we recently went to an SDA conference, and there's a lot of kind of discrepancy between what different stakeholders in the industry think should be done or know about the industry as a whole from their perspective. So you have builders or developers, as you mentioned, doing what they want to do. Then you got the requirements of a participant, and then the investor who's, pioneering the process and joining those two together, what their goals are. And I feel like part of what we do in this podcast is, as you mentioned, the education or the knowledge basis of investing and trying to educate people, as well as consulting in our own way with people to try to so they can better understand this industry and make more informed choices. And I feel like that's what's lacking the most, I would say, in this industry as a whole. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree totally. And a previous podcast noted the potential difference between Australian standards or developer standards for an NDIS house versus a participant's requirements. And so even in a regular build, the Australian standard is the lowest level. And so I am just cautious that potentially developers see the bright lights of high yields and are building in many locations around Australia to those standards. But, give or take 20 or 30 years, those accommodations may not suit the participant going forward because the extra lengths or widths of hallways or benches, etc., have not been taken into account. And so there either needs to be a maintenance or a rebuild or a refit in order to then make them suitable again, as opposed to, just not, as opposed to if you stick to the lowest or the Australian standard. I guess in the space, I sort of feel that it is a bit maybe disjointed. So there is no governing body. And so I am a bit cautious as well, like the aged care sector. There are many people that provide different levels on different standards of aged care support into that sector. And they vary greatly. When I was looking for a retirement place for mother, we discovered that very clearly. And so each may comply with Australian standards, but if you go above and beyond, then you create something that is a lot more desirable in that aged care space than the alternative. And so I just sort of almost envisage the same sort of thing happening in the NDIS space.
Completely agree. Yep. So we've seen a lot of changes going forward, from where it was a few years ago. So I expect, exactly what you've said, that gradually, with the change of government as well, that we'll gradually see a more streamlined and more accessible in terms of the processes and the methodology behind it moving forward.
Yeah, agreed. And I guess with more focus and all government focus, hopefully that will come about. I guess the caution, I guess, from the government side would be the level of funding. And so, yes, they are willing to support this space for the initial, 20 or so year period. I guess the big unknown is what happens after that. To ensure that this area or this space does not become too much of a burden, I guess, on the government.
Obviously, you're familiar with the podcast. You're on it. And you said before you've just finished listening to every episode, which is very cool. Did it help you understand NDIS investment, or did you use it as a tool to understand?
Yes, by all means. And I discovered that the more I listened, the more I understood. And often from an investor, you may just think about numbers. And in particular, as an accountant, that might be your focus. But there is so much more to it than that. And you need to, I think, as an investor, keep in mind the end result. Who do you want in your place in order to then provide a financial stream going forward? And so you do need to change your thinking to ensure that the participant is first. And I think as I went through more of the podcasts, that became a lot more aware to me as well. And so not just the building side of things, where there are some that talk about that or about the financial or the yields, but it's about also what is SDA 101 and who are the participants and how can this sort of accommodation help them out going forward. And that's of great value as I kept going through all of the podcasts. And so for me, it was almost a bit of a challenge. What number am I up to now? What about the next one? The next one might provide new insights. And so I have to get to the next one. And so, yeah, it was good. I really enjoyed them.
Oh, that's so good. So now that you've sort of gone through the initial stages of, buying the property, I think we're preparing contracts. That's coming up soon. Have you got any particular questions for us? Matt's here. He's the one who sold you the property. Or topics that you want to see on our podcast that we could do that could support you or other investors or just listeners in general?
From an investor's perspective, it's key to learn as much as you can about future-proofing. I think is the expression that I've heard used often. And so hence
it's our favourite expression.
Yeah, that's right. Because if you can provide a place that people love to be and it's in a good location, whether it be for recreational and or services or functionality, so the supermarkets and shops and things like that, then that is key. But it's also about the internal space to make sure that is a desirable space. So learning more about what builders can do in that space, and to understand the Australian standard might say 90 centimetres, but all the builds from this particular builder are at 120 because this makes a lot more sense because of accessibility for XYZ type of participant. And so I think understanding the difference between where a build is from the Australian standards to future-proofing is good to learn. Another area would probably relate to the type of participants. So on demand charts, I see a lot of still funding for different categories, relating from autism through to high care. And I guess from my perspective, I don't know which SDA category each participant fits into. And so I don't know what conditions would then slide into an IL, an FA, a robust, or a HBS.
Okay.
So
that's really good feedback.
Yeah.
Understanding that link also helps.
Yeah.
I think that the more people learn about the participant, then you can relate that in the future to providing a house that suits in a location that suits.
Absolutely.
Because one of the other challenges that I found also is that it does sound like there's a lot of requirements around Australia for NDIS housing currently, but to look at specific areas and know whether or not there is a demand for a particular type of housing, getting down to that granularity is difficult.
Yeah.
I must say I did like the idea of the podcast a couple ago about short-term and medium-term accommodation as well, because the thought did cross my mind as to, well, most people like to go on holidays. So does that mean a participant can never go on holidays because their home base is equipped for their needs?
Yeah.
No other place around Australia is. And so it did make me think if there is more avenue or opportunity for creating spaces for holiday or houses or locations, and so therefore there might not be a strong demand in the area, but if it is beside a beach or in the mountains or a holiday type destination, then maybe there still is a good opportunity to provide that style of housing.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I think that was last week that episode came out, STA. It was with Rob and Min. So that was a very good one. Yeah, STA is not really something that we've covered before, but that's Rob's cup of tea. He knows all about it. So I think that's definitely something we could delve into a little bit more, and it's definitely a good option to look at. And I guess my final question for you, David, is what advice could you give to other investors who are thinking about becoming SDA investors?
Like any type of investment, do your homework. Don't be drawn in by the dazzling figures that some people may show you. So hence, get in it for the right reasons in order to earn an average income, but to provide a social benefit. There are lots of ways to get involved in investing. You don't need $1 million up front. And so you can find other ways of investing to ensure then that you provide a social benefit. But research is the key. And so hence, going through podcasts as you've put up on the website, or looking at other investor information sessions that are around. Education is the key, but I would highly recommend it as a sector to get involved in particular before the big developers close it out. Because from what I've seen already, it just seems like big developers are already dropping in 4 units here, 8 units there, 20 units here, and they won't come online for another 18 or 24 months. But if people are looking to get into the NDIS space now's the time to get into it.
Matt, is there anything you want to add? Or
not really. I think that was a really good summary.
Perfect.
Of the process and your personal journey, David.
Yeah, no problem. I've enjoyed giving you insights into what it's been like.
Thank you so much. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, David, and I'm sure we'll be in contact in the future. You'll definitely be in contact with Matt. But thanks so much for taking time out of your day to come and talk to us. So, yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, David.
No problem. Anytime.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.